In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst.
He was, he is, and always shall be.
In today's gospel reading, we hear about this landowner who not only grows a vineyard, but he puts a hedge around it, he digs a wine press, he builds a tower, he does everything for this vineyard. It's all finished. It's ready to go. Nothing needs to be added. And all he does is put tenants in there to maintain the vineyard. And then when the time of fruit came near, when the grapes were ripe and when it was time to make this vineyard functioning and to harvest everything, the landowner sends his servants to go collect the portion that the landowner has. In other words, he gets his profit and the tenants would get their profit, whatever it was. But there was some type of deal there that is not written in the gospel, but we understand from anyone who works at a job that you get paid, and the owner of the company usually gets a larger portion because they're the ones who have done the majority of the work, or they have the majority of the bills. Whatever the case is, the workers at the vineyard were still going to get paid. But when the landowner sent the servants to go collect, they stoned one, they killed another, they beat another, and then the landowner sent more, and the same thing happened. So then what does he do? He sends his son, because he says, surely my son, they're going to respect my son. And what do? They cast him out of the vineyard, and then they kill him on the outside. They kill him outside his own vineyard. And they said, now the inheritance will be ours. Where do we hear this story before today in the Old Testament? We hear it in the story and the recounting of the devil being cast out of heaven. What does the devil want to do? He wanted to be God without God. He wanted the inheritance for himself. Even though he was a tenant, if you want to call it that, he was an angel, he was still in the mindset of saying, let me cast out the one who owns the vineyard. Let me cast out God, and let me be the one who is the owner of everything. That's why Christ, in the end of this parable, says, what's going to happen? He asks the people, what's going to happen? And they say, when the landowner comes, he's going to put all of them to death. That's it. You can't do that to the landowner's son. Everyone knows that. And they answer it with such surety. But they don't understand that he's talking about them. He's talking about anyone who would try to be God without God, and anyone who doesn't understand that God has done all the work for us, and we are simply the tenants. We are the ones that haven't done anything to earn where we're at. In fact, our lives today, it's not our own. What did we do to produce our own lives? What do we do to produce the world? Even the priesthood, the fathers of the church say, the priest is a priest, but he doesn't own the priesthood. It's not mine. I didn't come up with it. I didn't make it. I didn't take it. And if you recall in the ordination, if you've ever seen an ordination of a priest, he holds his hands together like this behind the altar table, and the communion, the host, the little square piece of bread that says ICXCNIKA on it, is placed in his hand. And the bishop says, receive this trust until the day when it's required of you. Until the day where you have to give an account of what did you do with it? What did you do with the priesthood that belongs to Christ? Christ is the high priest. That's why even in the bishop's throne, you see Christ depicted as a bishop, because he is the high priest. We all share in his priesthood. It's a gift. But we haven't done anything. The priest, even in the liturgy, says, I haven't done anything good to earn this. We haven't done anything to produce the world around us. God has done everything. What does he expect from us, though, is a little bit of effort. What do we get from the tenants in the vineyard? We see that they're lazy, is really what it is. They're lazy and they don't want to do the work. And God knows that. He knows that occasionally we get lazy. We get tired at the end of the day and we say, I'll say my prayers tomorrow. And I'm going to fast, but I'm really hungry, and there's a Burger King, and I don't like their fish sandwich. And I have a lot of things to do. I'm not going to go to church. I'm not going to, the list goes on and on of how we can become lazy. We can even become lazy with each other in acknowledging one another, in saying something nice to each other, in being kind. We can become lazy with that too. Marriages dissolve because of laziness. Christian lives get obliterated because of laziness. So in the story today, we hear about these tenants that all they had to do was take what they were given and just do a little something with it. Just collect the fruit from the plants that you didn't plant and press them in the press that you didn't dig and put them in the tower that you didn't build and be protected by the hedge that you didn't plant. All they had to do was just do a little bit. But they didn't. And the story of today in this gospel reading is really about God sending the prophets to his people originally and saying, here's the story of God. Here's what you need to know. Here's the things you need to do. And what do? They beat them. They killed them. They cast them out. So he sends more prophets. And eventually, he comes to the point of St. John the Baptist, where he sends St. John, the forerunner, to proclaim the coming of Christ, to proclaim the coming of the Son to the vineyard. And what do they do to him? They behead him. Some horrible little girl asks for his head on a platter. And then Christ comes, and what happens to Christ? Is he comes to give that message in person, to say, this is what you need to do, and what do they do to him? They cast him out. In fact, the burial site of Christ is not in the town of Jerusalem. It's on the outer walls, because he was considered not to be buried on the inside. So they buried him on the outside. His crucifixion was on the outside. I mean, all those sites are close, but it's on the outside, because he was to be cast out and then killed out of his own vineyard, out of his own people, out of his own bloodline. In fact, Christ earlier, before his crucifixion, says a prophet's not welcome in his own town. He is not seen as what he can offer. And many times that happens when we grow up. We go back to our hometowns or wherever, and they say, oh, you're little Georgie or whatever, your little Jimmy, your little Susie, whatever the case is. Oh, you're this, and you're like, I grew up since then. And they still see you as that little child that might have, thrown rocks and through windows or whatever the case was. And you can't escape that. The same thing with Christ, as he says, I'm not accepted by my own people. They can't see the glory of God. All they see is the carpenter's son. And they can't see past that. So what is this gospel reading telling us? It's telling us that we have to understand what God has done for us as a gift, and we just have to do a little bit and not be lazy. We have to be diligent, and that diligence doesn't have to be insanity or this crazy hyper drive that sometimes people have. And we see that many times with exercise. You see people who exercise and they do it a rational exercise, and then you see people who start out exercising and they go crazy and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then all of a sudden you see them later, they come to church and their arms in a sling, and what happened? I blew out my rotator cuff, Father, because I thought I could bench 380 pounds or whatever it was, and then that's the end of the exercise program. The same thing with what we do in our lives. You don't have to give away all your money. Even St. Paisios says that when we give to others, if we have a family, we should be, and responsibilities, we should be cognizant of that and realize it's a bad thing just to give everything away and then sacrifice our ability to help in the future and our ability to take care of and maintain ourselves. So he says give, but give proportionately and do proportionately what you can do. So the gospel reading today reminds us, don't just sit back and do nothing. Don't be lazy. Don't push off things and try to be God without God. Don't try and be your own church either. As we see sometimes people say, well, Father, I meet people a lot of times on the outskirts of the church, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm Greek. I'm like, okay, you're Greek. And then, I go to the Greek church. You always hear that, the Greek church. Like, what happened to Orthodox? It's out the way. I go to the Greek church. Okay, well, Zeus and Apollo are not here. This is the Orthodox church, okay? So, but people will say, oh, I do my own thing. I have my ikonas over here, and they take me in the little office, and they say, this is where I say my prayers, and this is where I do my thing, and then I make bread, it's like a little liturgical offshoot of whatever they have in their mind of their own little service that they're doing. They have their kandili there, and they're like, oh, can you give me holy? And they got holy water, vintages across the wall, and all this. But they're not liturgically participating. They're not sacramentally participating. Why? Because sometimes we try to do it without God. And this gospel reading reminds us we cannot do it without God. St. John Chrysostom says we cannot expect to be embraced by God if we don't embrace him. If we don't reach out and reach to God and ask for his help and to offer him the things that he is asking us for. Now, what's the one thing that we hear in the epistle reading today that was read? The one thing that God asks us for through the voice of St. Paul, if you want to just take one thing today. And the epistle reading says, whatever you do, do it with love. Do it with love in your heart. If you give with love. If you say something nice to someone, say it with love. If you want to do good works for someone, do it with love. Love for who? Love for God. Because when we do it for love for God, whatever we do to another person, it's like we're doing it to Christ himself. And that's what Christ reminds us of as well. So it's a reminder for us to be diligent. And at this new ecclesiastical year that we're coming to, September 1st, to re-up our strength and to rededicate our lives to God, to be strong, to be diligent, and realize he has done everything. All we need to do is consistently do something for him out of love. Amen.